hours or so. So I just wanted to come on here and do an Ask Me Anything so that you can ask any questions that you might have about the patches, anything pertinent to you. I'm actually going to be going on Zoom and broadcasting live from there in about, it'll be in 10 minutes. So as soon as I'm done with this broadcast, I will go ahead and continue on Zoom. And you can go ahead and I will put that in the comments below so that you're able to participate. Otherwise, you can go to zoom.us and then you'll enter meeting ID 714-794-5626. I'll repeat that again. That's zoom.us and it would be meeting ID 714-794-5626. So I want to share a few things until we have people that come on and start to ask questions. I did one earlier at 2 o'clock and that went very well. There was a lot of questions that were clarified at that time. But I just wanted to, I wish we had been able to record it, but when I do them from my cell phone, I'm not able to record them. So that is, it was just for the benefit of the people who were on that call at that time. So I wanted to make a comment also because I've been wanting to do a live video on Facebook probably for the last 5 days, since last Sunday actually, and I have not had time because it has been one of those weeks where it's been busy from the early morning until late at night, and it's been a phenomenal week. So I wanted to say this: it's not your DNA, it's your dinner and your desayuno. So some of you know what desayuno is. Desayuno is breakfast in Spanish. And what do I mean by that? It's not your DNA, it's your desayuno. So what I'm trying to say, it's not your genetics that are causing a problem. Because I studied genetics. I had to study genetics when I was pre-med at USC, and I had a prodigy. I had Dr. Phil Udarian, who is a Stanford prodigy, who was actually my genetics professor. Brilliant mind. And one of the things, you know, genetics for the last 30 years has been moving at a very rapid pace. In fact, when I took genetics with Dr. Phil Udarian, my textbook was obsolete by the first week of November. And that was very frustrating because as we were learning things, then there were times where, you know, we would have problems that we had to solve and genetic coding and all sorts of stuff that we had to figure out. And sometimes, you know, our homework, you know, we couldn't get an answer. So we would go to the teaching assistants who are masters and PhD students in genetics, and they couldn't figure out the answer either. So then, of course, then you go to professor hours to meet with Dr. Phil Udarian. And there was like a whole bunch of, usually when you would go to a professor's office during his hours, usually there's one, maybe two students or none. But when you would go to Dr. Phil Udarian's office hours, there was like 30, 40 of us. And the whole class was about 200 people. Because he weeded a lot of people out by the time you take genetics. So anyhow, so there's like 20, 30 of us. And I'll never forget this one time. This was like, you know, the first week of November. And it was really, well, now it's funny. It wasn't funny then, but back then, because we had been toiling with this, you know, he had given us this homework on Monday, and here it was Friday, it was due, and we're like all freaking out. It's Thursday. We've gone to teaching assistants, and the PhD students can't figure it out. And so he's like, okay, so then he lets us into this little mini, basically a mini seminar room where it could sit like 30 of us. And he gets up to the board, he looks at the problem, he puts it up on the board, and as he's trying to solve it, he's like, holy cow, I actually created a problem that's so hard that I can't even figure it out. He's like, okay, scratch that. The sound of the groans in the classroom was amazing. We were all groaning because we had wasted so much time trying to figure out something that not even our professor could figure out. So he's like, okay, scratch that. And that had never happened to me before, and I'm sure it never had happened to anybody in the classroom. And then when we went back to class, because the class would meet Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and labs were Tuesday and Thursday, so on Friday when we go back to class, then he apologized for creating a problem that not even he could, you know, solve, and that the master students and PhD students couldn't solve. But then when he opened up the book and he looked at the chapter that we were on, I don't remember the chapter, he said, oh my gosh, this book is obsolete. This is like old news. I can't teach from this book. He goes, put finished your genetics books because we can't use this anymore. And I thought, well, that's an expensive book. It's like a $200 book. I'm like, I'm not about to pitch it. Whatever was up until that point, I figured I could use that. And then he continued to teach separate from the book. So DNA, it's not your DNA, it's your desayuno, it's your breakfast, it's basically your food source. And so let me explain a little bit more, because if you go to take genetics doesn't give you any solutions on how to make your life better. When you study genetics, it's a blueprint telling you what the probability based on what genes are expressing and which ones are dormant, because some of them are expressing and they're turned on, and there are others that are dormant that haven't been activated, but due to your environment, and when I say environment, I also include in that any food, any supplements, and anything that you're experiencing where you're living, that can turn on a genetic expression, as it can also turn off a genetic expression. And then, of course, there's genetic mutations, but we're not going to get into that because that's going to complicate things. We're going to keep it simple. The KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid. We got 4 minutes before we're going to go on the Zoom Ask Me Anything, and that's zoom.us, and then meeting ID 714-794-5626. That's 56, adds up to 11, 26, adds up to 8. So, it's not your DNA, it's your dinner. So a lot of things in centralized medicine tells you that the problem is you have bad genes, you have bad genetic makeup, because you're expressing these things, because you have a genetic marker for this, that, or whatnot, and they're like, too bad, so sad, you have this genetic expression, there's nothing you need to do, you got to XYZ because of this. However, if you study the work of Bruce Lipton, if you study also the work, Bruce Lipton wrote The Biology of Belief, Creating Heaven on Earth, The Honeymoon Effect, phenomenal books. He's the father of modern epigenetics. He was doing stem cell cloning, stem cell research in the 60s before I was even born. Phenomenal body of work. He is the father of modern epigenetics. Before him, there was no such thing as epigenetics. In fact, when I did pre-med, they never talked about epigenetics because that was not a term. They're slow to bring things into academia, to tell you the truth. And any scientist will always tell you that things in science are always slow moving for adoption when they learn something new. The time that it takes from it to go from a lab into adoption, into textbooks and curriculum, for it to then go into centralized medical practice where a clinician will actually use it in a doctor's office or a hospital setting, it has a long period of execution. And if you check with Dr. Andrew Huberman of Stanford Research Institute, he'll tell you the same exact thing. That's just a known fact. That's just how things are. So let me get back to it. I got 3 minutes to tell you about why it's not your DNA. It's your desayuno. It's your breakfast. It's the food that you eat. It's the environment. Because it's not your DNA. It is actually, like, if you take close attention and pay attention to what it is that you're eating, and the simple change in not what you eat, but how you eat what you eat, the order in which you eat things. So, for example, the American diet is one that we take for breakfast. A lot of people eat oatmeal, cornmeal, grits, cream of wheat, all those sugary cereals that are in boxes, yogurt with all sorts of sweeteners on them and so forth. And so it tends to be a sweet, pancakes, waffles, French toast. All of that is 100% starches and carbs, which at a chemical level is all glucose, and sometimes glucose and fructose, which causes inflammation in the body, which causes glycation. Glycation is the processing and metabolization of glucose, and it starts to burn up because it causes inflammation. That means flames inside. In flames, that's inflammation. That's what that means, which causes also the swelling, because as you burn tissue, of course, it's going to swell. If you look at a baby's joints, they're beautiful, clear. It's like almost like a see-through clear white material. But if you look at an old person's joints, those joints are like brown because they've glycated. They've been inflamed over time, and they actually start to burn, and it starts to cause some damage. Okay, we got 1 minute left before I'm going to be jumping on the Zoom call to do the Ask Me Anything. So I'm going to continue on as soon as it's 3:30, because I want to be true to my word, be impeccable with my, the 4 agreements, as Don Miguel Ruiz talks about. So changing the order in which you eat, what you eat, can make all the difference in the world. We can drop your glucose levels so that you don't have a spike in glucose, and you not only lose weight, but you have clear mental focus, mental clarity, and so forth. And it just hit the 3:30 mark. So if you want to continue on here with the Ask Me Anything, be sure to go to zoom.us, meeting ID 714-794-5626. Okay, I'm going to jump off here. I'm going to jump on the Zoom, and I'll continue this, and I will answer any questions that you have about the patches or whatever it is that you've got going on. Ciao for now, my friends and gems.